while she's getting her slides up, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Catherine Merrill. If you haven't heard me present on Make CAPA Cool, it's your first time. How many of you guys have not heard me present on the Make CAPA Cool? Cool. Okay. The rest of you will see some of it is a summary for those who hadn't heard before, and then I'll go beyond to where we are in our progress. But my background is I'm a quality regulatory program director at Medtronic. I joke and say they raised me because I've been there like over 20 years. So one of the biggest surprises I've had on this project is as we're getting together with the rest of industry, there's so many times, how many of you have heard that comment that says we've done this to ourselves, why do we do this, the regulations don't require it? Well, what I found when I get into a room with all other quality professionals from all the other organizations, they're doing it the same way. So there's something in the process that is driving us to do it all to ourselves. So if we can fix it, we can fix it for everyone. So I was just going to give you an update today on the hashtag Make CAPA Cool project. Make the clicker work. I think the first one's slow. Did you have a special way of reading these? Go my head. That one. Maybe you can click it. It's the other one. Oh, it is. It's the backwards button. Okay. Okay. I'm going to give you an overview of our progress. I'm going to introduce you to the new framework. The last one was Rev 4. This is now Rev 6. Go through some pilot results summary and the next steps and invite you to my afternoon session, which will be the most exciting one. Sorry to the rest of you. So the overall general reason for this project is, you see that little triangle there? The words in the bottom corner say thousands of employees. We absolutely love solving problems, but nobody really wants to get a CAPA. And so that's ultimately the industry struggle that we've been trying to address with this project. So we're going to leverage cross-industry best practices and collaboration to fundamentally recast it as a continuous improvement framework. So the main goal is to how do we make it as easy to do work as we do within the continuous improvement processes we have today. And this is quite a large team. We have 16 industry members, including NDIC and FDA, and with over 30 members. So everybody's highly engaged. Bleda is our FDA member who continuously pulls us, when we put our quality hats on and we get closer to the edge, pulls us away from the edge. This is, you guys saw this before last time, but I think it's a really good slide to explain where we're headed. And today, if you think of the dark blue as the effort that's required to do a CAPA, you'll notice that it's pretty much the same effort regardless of risk that goes in there. There's some modification, but you have the same type of documentation that's required. So that results in fewer problems solved and reduced improvement over time. So the key box at the bottom is that during these CMMI appraisals that we've been talking about for the maturity model, we've actually found that they are identifying that CAPA is more of a compliance exercise than a problem-solving exercise. And so they're just sort of solidifying what we all know when we live in the quality organization. So the future where we want to go to is we want to treat problems with the appropriate level of effort. And so we're recognizing that not all problems are created the same. So we can go anywhere on the continuum, from find and fix, I know exactly what I need to do to fix this, to the problems that might be closer to impacting a patient or a user. And that's where that additional oversight or cross-functional teams or even regulatory scrutiny is value added in those situations. So how do we identify them? So that we're hoping to drive more problems being solved over time, greater improvement over time. And what we're finding as we go with the framework that we've identified is actually the regulations do allow us to do this, to treat problems with commensurate with risk. But today's pain points, so you'll notice here it's sort of like a continuum where every problem could be treated discretely, like as its own little entity. We're finding with the pain points to identify what effort is appropriate for each specific problem. It's more important for our team to begin to bucketize that for the industry, to make it easy to make those decisions about where these problems fit. So this one I walked through too. I'll do this really quick. We're following a very proven structured approach. McKinsey company is helping us with this. We started out with pre-work. This is one of my favorite parts other than the face-to-faces, and this is because we got to benchmark a bunch of industry that were non-med device. So aerospace, the automotive, Shingo, and some of the high-level themes that we got from those that you'll see reflected in the framework are, if everything is treated as just the same importance, nothing's important. So if everything's important, nothing is. The other one is that critical connection to the customer. If you talk to Toyota, they're talking to the customer, that's going to impact the customer, it's going to impact the customer. And so we felt that within our framework, we needed to highlight that patient piece of it. The third one is they try to solve problems at the lowest possible level. And so the current traditional CAPA we have today, you couldn't hand it to someone on the floor typically. Okay, they usually need a CAPA mentor. We also did a user survey. We got over 300 pain points from industry, and we got together in a design thinking workshop at the McKinsey organization. We did a 2-day face-to-face to come up with our first revision. The key pain points we had, I know this is really tiny for you guys in the back. The number one is it's not clear when I should open that traditional CAPA. And the second one is we have unclear relationships within our non-conformance systems or our continuous improvement systems, and so you get overlap or waste. And the third one is around lack of planned resources for CAPA. So we then actually interviewed a bunch of people from ORA, and one of the key pain points that really stood out to me was that one of the investigators said, we don't like it when organizations open a CAPA for every single non-conformance, which is not what we always hear, but that is a pain point for them. So we are really looking to be smarter about how much effort we put for every problem that comes up. We walked through a couple of different iterations with a number of retrospective pilots. And then we had a real-time pilot, which I'll show you, where we used real-time data. And we came up with our fourth iteration. And that's what I presented at the last forum. And then right now we did a second pilot in March. Not a pilot, we brought the pilot data to a face-to-face in March, and we developed our fifth and sixth framework iteration, and we're right now in the middle of a write-up into a white paper. And the three different, we have weekly meetings right now, and the team continues to align on that. McKinsey has an editor that we're working with to write that white paper. We have all the information we need, we're just making it readable by everyone so that you guys all know what we are talking about. The white paper will include a framework recommendation, regulatory implications for regulators, and then continuous improvement best practices that we're actually going to recommend organizations can implement today. So that's the general process. What I'm going to do is go backwards. I'm going to touch base on the pilots as well as the framework that we came up with. So the pilots that we did 2 retrospective pilots, which means existing CAPAs that were today. We pulled them, random sampled them, and looked at how they would engage with our framework. So the first pilot was around how easy is it to identify what would go to a traditional CAPA. And the second pilot was namely looking at, do we have any orphan flows? Like, do we have anything that would typically be treated within the traditional CAPA that now has no place to live? And so we had to make sure that whatever our solution we were proposing would not leave anything unhandled, so to speak. And then we did the real-time pilot, which was a little bit longer, and it had real-time data that was then, we simulated it through. We didn't change how anybody did their work, but we simulated it through the framework. We had 201 issues that went through the pilot. 167 of them went through the lower risk flow, and 34 of them went through the traditional CAPA. So you're looking at about a 30 to 70% split. So 30% of the issues today, if we put them through the framework, would go towards that traditional CAPA, and 70%. And again, this is like I think 60 to 80%, but an average of about 70% would go through the lower risk flows. So what we did with this pilot information is we brought it to the second face-to-face we had to sort of finalize our framework, and we invited the entire team to come to participate. And we had about 17 participants that could be there of 9 different organizations. As we walked through this, we did bring it back to the rest of the team, and so everybody had a chance to contribute. So I will tell you, we had really lively discussions. I think it was one of my favorite face-to-faces that I've had. We had four companies that were presented. Like I said, we aligned on key definitions. So the last time I presented, we had a lot of questions that had to do with what we had developed, which is team language, where to us we knew exactly what that word meant, but nobody we were presenting to had any idea. And sometimes it meant something different within regulatory speak. So we've been spending some time putting it back in the language that people would understand the intent as it relates to regulations today. We had 3 working groups during that face-to-face. One was targeting the framework definition, another one was targeting the regulatory implications, and the last one were best practices for the industry. And I have 2 slides. This is where the meat of the presentation is, if you're curious about the framework. It looks different but the same. We still have 2 distinct flows. If you were here at the last presentation, you'll notice an additional flow. So the main changes that we had, I'll point out, but the similarities we'll start with. We have an external flow, those quality issues that have come from outside data sources, which means they have a closer potential of impacting a patient or a user. And those will immediately go for assessment of, do I need to go to a traditional CAPA? And you'll use the organization's risk process to identify, do I have unacceptable or acceptable risk? For internally identified items that are still within the control of the organization, they'll do a check. Has anything escaped or not? If it has, it's going to go up to the external flow. The ones down at the bottom, and I'll just point at this. This is way too small for you guys to see, so you'll have to read the slides that are sent out. But this is a non-trend flow, and this is a trend flow. So this was a main addition we had at the last face-to-face, is the distinction between, is this an item that's just occurred a single time, or it's not a trend yet, and those that have become, they're a trend or there's a recurrence to them. And so the non-trend flow, we check to make sure that it's escaped. If it hasn't, it can be treated with this lower risk CAPA flow. And the next slide will go into that in more detail. Okay, and then if you have identified that you've now become a trend, your high-risk trends would get escalated to your traditional CAPA flow. So that's the key distinction that we made. You'll notice that it's bucketized into like 3 different flows, which is different than that first image I showed you where you had that continuum. The regulation allows for that continuum, but what we find in the practicality of implementing this on a day-to-day basis for people of all different flows and walks of industry, and I'm a new engineer versus I'm seasoned and experienced, how do we make sure people are making the right call all the time? And historically what we've seen, because we haven't had something bucketized like this, we defer to we're treating them all the same because we can't make those decisions. So we really wanted to make those tiers more black and white so that organizations could make that call around that risk-based problem solving. Is there any questions on the framework that we're proposing itself? Yes, George.
Why would there be no risk assessment with a I think I know the answer, but you're not indicating a risk assessment with the internal non-trend?
So those get processed, they'll still be addressed. They'll be processed through the lower risk flow, which I'll explain on the next slide. You get assessed when you're a trend to determine if you're high risk, because that will now be treated with the higher risk one. If you have a non-trend, if you don't address it and it turns into a trend, you're now going to go to that second tier where it does have the risk assessment. So anybody curious about the lower risk flow? Yeah. You guys have held your peace last time. They couldn't wait until the next slide. So that's one. This slide is, I'm going to read it because it's way too small for you guys in the back. Okay, but I will read it because I think it's really important that you get the distinction between the traditional CAPA and what's being proposed with the lower risk flow. This is a majority of what we worked on during the face-to-face. And there's 2 places where you'll see a change. In the lower risk flow, we're proposing a lower level of documentation, like reduced amount of documentation and a simplified effectiveness check. So the top one, this high-risk CAPA, is where you will document, everybody's known, we documents very specifically the thought process and the methodology around identifying the root cause. The proposal is for the lower risk flow is you only have to identify cause. You don't have to document the thought or the methodology behind how you got there. And so let's say a screw comes out of a fixture and you do all this work to identify how. You basically just say the screw fell out of the fixture because of this, and this is how we're going to detect if there's a recurrence. So it becomes much simpler within your quality management system documentation. But what we do want to make sure is very clear, and this is that sort of that trust piece we're building into this methodology, is the comment down here says this is not to encourage less rigor, but to shift the focus from compliance to continuous improvement. For instance, an organization might use an alternate problem-solving flow like PDCA or DMAIC, but the quality record would not have all the additional documentation rigor needed to make sure that the language was clear for an investigator years from now. And so the identified cause would be captured in the existing system. So that ultimately opens up problem solving at all levels of the organization, because you don't have to worry about how it's documented. You have to document the cause, but not that whole entire methodology. And so what we're hoping to do is drive the focus away from the compliance piece and move it towards the actual problem being solved. So that's the main key difference is around that root cause analysis. So any questions on that change in the lower risk flow?
That just, I guess, I mean, that seems to be almost a bit of a semantic thing, right? I think, I mean,
yeah, when you talk about cause and root cause, so we talked about what the regulation requires, and today the regulation requires that cause be identified, not root cause, and that's what allows us within the regulations to not document the thought process or methodology to prove root cause.
So you're essentially establishing that there's a definitional difference between cause versus root cause.
Okay, so
even though that's
this
not
is
played out
even
in
a
reg.
smaller word.
This is like your preamble text stuff down here, right?
Root cause implies the absolute deep underlying root cause. In contrast, the regulatory requirement is that the cause is established. So we do recognize that there's going to have to be a cultural change both on the behalf of industry and of the agency, because the agency is moving to a position of trust that we are going to solve the problem right and have the appropriate rigor. And we have to trust that when they come in and inspect us, they're not going to get us because we didn't write it down. So this is not something that we would do today. You can jump in whenever.
So if we did try and implement this, given that this was a collaborative effort, is that possible, or what would the barriers be to actually implementing something like this in practice?
So I really hope you attend my working group in the afternoon, because the next steps we have is to identify what would we have to do to pilot this to move to the next phase, looking at those things.
I think this is really cool what you're doing. We had this approach at Merck back in the late 90s, and still is today, where you have the risk stratification of failures, and had the version of, this doesn't even require a higher level signature. Like we even got it to what level needs to sign it and things like that. So that's been in place for a long time. So I think it's possible to put it in place as long as you have the whole program and you can show what you're doing, and we never got any pushback.
Yeah, and we get it. And so we have organizations that have things that are similar, but not all organizations, because they've gotten different feedback from investigators.
I just wanted to add to that we all acknowledge the fact that we are all accepting some risk with the fact that maybe the root cause is not identified, but the cause itself, which may not be the actual cause of the issue. But because it's a lower risk CAPA or lower risk issue, we acknowledge that we're going to accept some risk associated with that. In terms of implementation, we do have ORA as part of the team as well. The draft white paper will be shared with ORA as well to receive their comments and their input, so they also have an opportunity to work with us and to identify any concerns there might be ahead of time when it comes to implementing this framework. In addition to that, when we interviewed ORA, they did have very similar pain points that industry did, which was interesting for us to actually bring to light. One of which was there's so much documentation that it takes them forever to review. It might not be necessary. It's within different systems. It's very difficult to trend and monitor issues internally. And so we're hoping that by utilizing the other subsystems that exist and allowing facilities to make changes and corrections and even corrective actions within the lower issues within the different subsystems will drive continuous improvement and quicker actions to improve both processes and products.
And Blada mentioned something key that I've forgotten to mention, and that is around the lower risk flow would not be escalated into a separate system as a CAPA. It could be treated within the quality management system that exists. Audit findings within the audit system, non-conformance, corrective actions within the non-conformance system. So, thank you, Blada.
I'd like to comment maybe for Cisco. You know, there is a NIP program, the new inspection protocol program. Could this be incorporated as part of the compliance program guide with the NIP?
Good question, and I don't know the full answer to that simply because I know that there's still, at least from the last I checked, the NIP is still their evaluation as a program of what they're going to do. I know what the overall concept is. I think it's only got a limited application right now. So it'd be a situation of once it gets formalized.
I know that part of it has been written into a compliance program guide because on the sterile front, they're actually inspecting based on the new inspection program. Okay. So
they've implemented, but only on the sterile.
On the sterile side, right? Yeah. So I thought this might be a very good avenue to incorporate this kind of thinking. You know, now we historically our program has a, you know, we use SAP on C1, C2, C3, C4. C1 is no patient risk, meaning that there's no clinical relevance, and therefore, you know, it's lower risk, and therefore it goes a different path. But it's the acceptance by the ORA has been funny.
Captain, thanks. So, in terms of implementing this globally, any concerns about adoption for global regulations, as most of us live in a multinational world of not having a CAPA system just for the U.S.?
We have a wonderful team member named Mark Henry, who is our NDSAP rep, and he has been very vocal in helping us align with those regulations.
I think he's online, or he was earlier.
So I recently talked to Mark Henry, who mentioned that he's also been talking to the other regulatory bodies and just notifying them of the work that we're doing as part of this subgroup. And they're very interested to hear about what this white paper is going to look like. So I think the key after this is going to be piloting or further piloting the framework and gathering additional data to see how is that working in the field, but as well as we do need the buy-in from ORA, or else this is not going to work, because it's a huge culture shift, both in the industry side as well as FDA side.
So if you go to the next slide, it looks like both of these say that they don't, but they still meet the intent of regulations for the low risk option.
Yeah, and I actually still need to finish going through the other really key distinction with the lower risk one.
Well, my question is, if the low risk option still meets the intent of regulations, why not propose that all CAPAs go through that pathway?
It's commensurate with risk. So the regulation indicates that you would address it, have the appropriate response to the appropriate problem. So right now, we're not arguing that those issues that have escaped the organization's control and are potentially patient impacting should not have that additional regulatory scrutiny on them. So that's the position of the team right now. And it was real interesting. Once for those problems that really this would be an effective, an appropriate response for, nobody wanted to change the current traditional CAPA process for those problems that warranted it. But it was, how do I deal with the rest of the population, the other 70%? But it's a good question. The second piece around the lower risk flow that we had was around the effectiveness check. And that was around the potential to use ongoing monitoring of key quality parameters to ensure no recurrence, or to passively monitor your controls or your processes if you have those checks in place to check for recurrence. So the positive behavior we think this will drive is people will have an increased amount of controls that they will put in their line to ensure that they're detecting new recurrence, because it'll allow them to address corrective actions in a much more expedient manner. So those were the two distinctions with the lower risk flow. So what we're hoping to do is, what someone had said, when you bring in the cop, was that George? I think it is. So I had a picture in mind. Said right now, sometimes it feels like today with an investigation or with corrective actions with CAPA, we're on two different sides with the agency. You can't be trusted to solve it right, but we give them limited transparency. We're not on the same side, sort of a tug of war, clear winner or loser of the exchange. What we're hoping to move towards is we're both striving together for the same goal. And for me, all of the areas within Case for Quality feel like that to me. So we have two winners. The framework is viewed with a mindset of trust by both. Like I said earlier, it really is going to take both sides to extend trust in this situation when we do the pilot. So we're going to win together or fall together. We do have a hashtag Make CAPA Cool 2020 goal. We want to pilot it, and so we want the two things that we thought about as a team is we want organizations, when we pilot it, sort of the success metrics would be around, are we getting quicker problem solving cycles? And are we seeing a stronger continuous improvement behavior or culture? So I'm sort of talking with Prakash a little bit about what AdvaMed has been doing with the culture, because how we would measure that we haven't determined yet. So the next steps, we're going to complete the draft of the white paper by the end of July. Review against the initial pain points from industry and FDA. We're going to complete that in July, and then circulate it with our executive steering committee, ORA members like Bleda mentioned, and key stakeholders, and then develop a case for quality charter for the 2020 pilot phase. So that's July and August. And so this afternoon when we get together, really what we want is for those of you who are really interested in either helping us pilot it, or you're interested in helping us make this successful, that you would come help shape our pilot. And we've got some key questions that we're going to go into.
Yeah.
There we go. What must be included in the MDAC pilot program for the framework to be successful? You guys are probably thinking of things in your mind going, there's no way because of fill in a blank, or if I was going to do this, I would pilot it in this way, blank. This is what I'd have to feel comfortable being a pilot for my organization. We really want to know those things so we can catch any blind spots as we design the pilot. So that's all I had. Any additional questions?
That framework is similar to what we use. We use non-conformance, a significant non-conformance, and a CAPA, 3 tiers. My question to you is, when you come out with this framework, we all use some kind of software system. It would be really interesting, I think, to know what software system is most applicable or useful for this type of a framework. Because we get in this do loop where we've got way too many fields. When we try to simplify things, there's no way to turn them off, and it's just a pain in the neck. So any input you guys could give to that would be great.
Okay, well, that's good feedback.
So I this is exciting because, you know, we do have a risk-based CAPA decision tree, et cetera. And at the end of the day, after we do all that risk assessment, the only thing that's different is the level of approval of the file, none of the work. And so, you know, I think the feedback you got, a lot of it is because none of us can answer the question of the compliance side and the expectation that we've all been given on where that needs to be. So I think the fact that you have the key partners in this discussion is absolutely fabulous. And I certainly look forward to if we can work to some resolution and common agreement. I think that's a great step forward.
Thank you.
All right, Kevin. Next up,